Well, on to today's webinar from the Open Group, which is one of the series of events that we're doing in conjunction with BizDesign, which is an extremely active member of the Open Group. And before I go over to today's speakers, Mark and Peter, I would just like to go over a few little housekeeping issues just to keep the event moving forward smoothly. Firstly, with regards to questions, the best way to submit a question that you would answer directly by either the speaker is to use the text QA facility. Write a question into that text QA facility. Can I ask you to address it to all or all participants? That one gets to see the questions that are being submitted. If you'd like to make an observation or a comment or have a short conversation with a fellow attendee, then the best way to do that is via the text chat facility. The intention is to answer as many questions at the end of the presentation. It is also being fully recorded, so if for any reason you have to leave early, or if you experience any local technical difficulties, then everyone that's registered for today's event will email with the appropriate link to where you can access that recording. Now, I know occasionally people do experience local audio difficulties, so the recording may be of assistance to you should that happen. Mark and Peter, if you're ready to go, can I ask you to start your presentation?
Yes, thank you. My name is Peter Matthijssen. For the next hour, I will be doing this webinar together with my colleague Mark Lankhorst.
I'm Mark Lankhorst. I'm Peter's colleague, and we're going to host this webinar together.
For our we will be discussing about lean and enterprise architecture, and of course those are two hype subjects, but how do they interact? If you look at lean and enterprise architecture, they both have to do with change, and Darwin said nicely, not the strongest or the most intelligent that survive, but it are those that are most adaptive to change. So what we do today is not good enough for tomorrow. We need to constantly adapt and improve, and that's what this presentation will be about. But I'm a consultant and trainer at BizDesign. I work as a Lean Six Sigma black belt and also business process management expert for kind of organizations and branches. And we do quite a lot of publications. So two of my books are Thinking Processes and Working with Lean.
And I'm, like Peter, a service line manager at BizDesign. My responsibility is the enterprise architecture domain. You might know my name from the development of the Archimate language. I was responsible as a manager for developing Archimate, and I'm using that now with BizDesign, of course, very intensively. I've written about that as well. Both of us have our own domains. We are both service line managers for our specific domains, and today's talk is about the combination of those domains, about lean and about enterprise architecture. Words about BizDesign. I already mentioned these two domains, these two service lines. You see here a picture with three of our domains. We also address business modeling as well, which is not going to be a subject of today. And BizDesign offers consulting, training and best practices in these domains. So we have a broad spectrum of services we offer to our clients. We're also based in many different countries. Our home country is the Netherlands, but we have our own branches in various countries around the globe. You can see that around here, but I won't go into the details there because I don't think that's very interesting for you at the moment. This is the schedule of our talk today. We'll provide a brief introduction on what we are doing. We are talking about the introduction. Then we give our vision on management. That's Peter's part. Enterprise architecture, which is my part. We are going to discuss how the two work together. We will focus on specific lessons you can learn from Lean in doing EA. We'll also address the use of EA in Lean projects, so how EA can help Lean in keeping stuff coherent. And finally, we'll, of course, discuss the business value of doing this all together. Pace will be quite high. We are going to discuss a lot of different subjects, so you'll see a lot of slides flashing by. And this is basically the end picture we are going to work towards. On the right-hand side, you see the architect, and if you look closely, you might see the crop circles of the TOGAF ADM diagram there. On the left-hand side, you see a lean expert, and this lean practitioner is also working with his own little process, which will be explained by Peter. Both are cyclical processes, and they need to interlock, but there's some difficulties there. We'll address that. But the picture will be that you can turn these wheels and they interlock and reinforce each other.
Lean. Let's talk a little bit more about lean management. And many people will know about lean management and about its roots. And of course that's Japan. Japan after the Second World War, very difficult times in Japan. And in those difficult times, Toyota was building about 1,000 cars a year. Well, that was not a lot of cars, and they had a lot of technical issues at that time. So they kind of collected all kind of best practices and techniques that could help them eventually make products faster and cheaper and get them to customers. And they developed the Toyota Production System, TPS. And TPS, what we know today worldwide as lean management. It focuses on customer value. We will talk about that later on. Some important lean are flow, eliminating waste. People will know about that, and also the continuous improvement. So it's the technical side, but there's also mindset. If you look at lean, world-class lean organizations, you see that they kind of live lean management. It's lean thinking. And I like this quote. So it's not about being somewhere. It's about being on your way. So you can be lean. So organizations that say, well, we are lean. Well, even Toyota says they are halfway, but you can become a little bit leaner every day, and that's what it's all about. It's a kind of journey. With books like these, then there is a kind of lean approach with 5 different phases and identify activities in the process that create value. The third order of defense, use value stream maps, for example, improve flow, customer pull, and remove waste. Well, this is a powerful aspect in this, but this is a kind of the large movement. This is not kind of a product approach. But there are important parts of lean in this, in those aspects. I want to highlight a few of those. One, a flow is really important, and I like those diagrams here. And on the side we see the undeveloped flow, and we see the rapids where the water is streaming fast from the mountain, and we see the small lakes where the water is standing still. Well, it takes quite some time for water to come from top to down, and if you look at this as a system, there's quite a lot of water in this system on the left side. If you wait a couple of million years, you have the stream on the right side. They're moving at one speed all the way down, so it's down, and also there's less water in this system. This is what we call flow. Flow means continuous movement of products and services. Well, in our organizations we see a lot of undeveloped flow, a lot of places where no value is added and things are standing still. Well, if you lean offers all kind of techniques to develop the flow in the process. An important aspect in lean is waste. Lean is also referred to as waste management. And kind of deadly waste, and originally there were 7 deadly wastes, but then there were 14 and 21, and there are a lot of wastes. And if you look at organizations, we can find those wastes, like movement of people, transport of things, defects where we have to do rework, inventory, processing, doing more than a customer wants or wants to pay for, complexity, unused talent. We will look at some of those wastes later on also from an EA perspective. But if you look at those wastes and you look at your organization or at your processes, you can realize a lot of those wastes where we see, well, there is over-processing at receiving a claim and at completing a claim, we do some rework. So a very powerful perspective to look at your organization, also to improve, to reduce waste. So we looked at the 5 steps in lean management for the large movement, but if you want to take small steps, we need something else. We have the Plan, Do, Check, Act. People will know about that, but what we use a lot, and we borrowed it from Six Sigma, is the DMIC cycle. We have define, measure, analyze, improve, control. And this is a very powerful cyclic approach helping you to get improvements. So beginning at define, we say, okay, what is the problem? What's the challenge at hand we want to solve? And go to the measure phase. What possible causes are there that could be the case? And also we would look at the current situation. What are the effects? Do we have some measurements, or can we measure some things? From there, some analysis. So find the causes and eventually the root causes of the problem. So we have the small set of causes that have a large impact to our problem at hand. And those causes we will involve, and we will set some solutions to tackle those causes. And from there we can implement and do some process control. So it's a logical way of improving. And I work on continuous improvement. And our techniques available help you in all those phases of the improvement. And you will recognize quite a lot of them in this overview. These diagrams are all from our Lean Coach tool. This is available for download if you want to try it and to see more of those techniques. I'll highlight a few of them later on in this presentation. Okay, so we talked about Lean. We talked about Lean techniques. We have these techniques available here. We have the thinking in processes, because we always want to have the end-to-end process in mind. And by using this and using an approach, we can get some real improvements in quality, or reliability, or flexibility, and costs eventually. So that helps us. But if you really want to work on continuous improvement, you will also, you need to catch this roof. You also need to have a Lean culture. And this is also what Lean is not just about the techniques. That's sometimes a misunderstanding. Lean is eventually mainly about people. And we have our foundation of this house. And this is all about people. So we have on the left side commitment. We need management commitment for Lean. If there's no management commitment, it will be very hard to really build this house of Lean. On the other side, we need to focus on the customer. What customer value? How does the customer define value? What is our goal? How can we really deliver quality to this customer? In the middle, it's about the real work. And the work, well, if we look at organizations, this kind of Japanese look on Western organization. And of course, we have our top management on top, mid management in the middle, and below we have our shop floor. But this is a shop floor with all people with no heads. And what Lean says is, well, the shop floor is the place where profound knowledge is found. This is the place where people are working directly in the process and have a lot of knowledge of how to improve this process. If you look at Lean management, it's not about also involving people from the shop floor. And they call it the gamma in Lean management, and it's referred to the people doing the real work. It's important in Lean management. It's all also about people. Okay, so we talked about the D-Mic cycle, and here we have our Lean practitioner doing the D-Mic cycle and improving the work and doing the work a little bit better every day. So if you look at the characteristics of Lean management, we could say, well, we want to have short cycles, not very large projects, but doing the work a little bit better every day. We want to involve people. We want to use common sense, and we need those quick results. This is typically what Lean is about. Let's talk about enterprise architecture. Mark.
Yeah, let's move on. Enterprise architecture as a field. I gather that most of you will have an architecture background more than a Lean background, given the focus of the Open Group. So some of this will be familiar to you. Enterprise architecture is a field that focuses on getting your enterprise strategy realized. It's about business transformation, change in the large. Like Lean is about change in the small, this is about change in the large. So the typical project you do as an enterprise architect are focused indeed on realizing business strategy, on outsourcing, impact analysis of these large initiatives, stuff like portfolio management, decision making on investments in your application portfolio or in your project portfolio. And the pyramid shown on the right on this slide basically says that. You have your mission and vision and strategy on top, the formula goals, how to get from your current situation to your desired situation, and then you have instruments like enterprise architecture to get this moving. And of course, culture as well, leadership and people, but enterprise architecture is mostly focused on the, well, you could say the hard stuff, not on the cultural stuff. And it's about changing the large, and of course you need to have insight in the current state of affairs, but it's mostly about how to get to a future situation or entire organization. It's about enterprise. Enterprise architecture as a discipline, it's about basically about two things. It's about the process of doing architecture. It's about the discipline of the architectural work. It's about the product, architecture as a product, the architecture of the enterprise. Both are focused on control change in the enterprise. Its product aspect, you see enterprise architecture as a field that discusses different components and their relations. And these components can be entire architectural domains like information architecture and process architecture. Of course, the elements within these domains, and focuses on the relationships between them. It's about keeping stuff coherent. It's about getting your implemented across the board, about the entire organization. So these relationships are very important. Look at architecture as a process. We have methods, and of course within the context of the Open Group, the architecture development method from TOGAF is most prominent. And here you see the familiar circle diagram, where you have this cycle from your preliminary and architecture vision, the design of the architectures, finding opportunities and solutions for realizing them, and finally governing the implementation of the architecture. And this is very, well, you could say a long-term cycle. Compared to the lean cycle, this takes a lot more time. This is really a process that involves a lot of people, involves a large part of the organization, has a different rhythm from the continuous improvement where you, on a daily basis, you might improve your different aspects of your process. This is really about getting things moving at a large scale. Systems are quite different. Here you see this architect again with the wheel that he tries to turn. And this is really about keeping things coherent, keeping things moving in the same direction, which may take time, which may take a lot of discussions with different stakeholders, which involves a lot of different domains within your company. It's about keeping stuff well thought through. It takes analysis time, it takes design time to come up with a good enterprise architecture. It's more focused on wide-ranging principles than on local small improvements. It's about moving your entire company in a certain direction, not just on having the local improvements. Long-term results. It's about getting the company from A to B as a whole, which of course requires you to achieve short-term results as well, but the focus of enterprise architecture is really on the long term, not with steady low-hanging fruit that everybody is always talking about. Of course it's important, but the important part of enterprise architecture is of course this long-term vision on change. And if we put these two pictures together, the lean practitioner with his short cycle of improvements and this architect with his long-term vision and scope, we see this clashes. We see if you don't govern this collaboration, stuff might go wrong. People on the short-term things will say, yeah, we have these architects with all their rules and principles, but the only limit is us in our abilities for improving locally, and this is just the architectural police that hinders us in our work. On the other hand, the architects might say, well, yeah, we have all these local improvements, but they are trampling on other people's work. They are suggesting improvements that only work for their small scope. They are disturbing the longer-term vision, and they are distracting us from our long-term perspective. So we way for people in these two disciplines to work together fruitfully. Moreover, we can learn a lot from lean practice in enterprise architecture itself. So lean to regard this larger context to avoid global, to avoid local optimization, and to focus on these global long-term acts of business value. And vice versa, lean can help as architects to be grounded in reality, to avoid waste, and also deliver short-term results, not just focus on the long term, but deliver results in the short term as well. And at architecture from this lean perspective, and identify similar kinds of wastes as Peter already addressed in his part on lean. It's not just about process improvement, but this notion of waste is applicable to enterprise architecture as a whole. Just to show you a few examples of that, we have identified what we call the 7 deadly wastes of enterprise architecture. Go through them and illustrate them, just give you a flavor of the kinds of wastes you find in your architecture. And the deadly waste of enterprise architecture, so deadly waste in the architecture itself, in the architecture as a product. We will talk about the deadly waste of enterprise architects, which is more about the process, about doing architecture. First, the wastes of enterprise architecture. The transport. Transport is a very common waste in lean process improvement, but in enterprise architecture itself. If you look at your architecture, you often see a lot of data being moved around because it's not in the right place. You have to move it from A to B because B needs the data and A doesn't available at the right time, for example. A lot of stuff is being moved around without a clear need, usually only because your architecture suffers from, for example, legacy. Waste, which is also very common, is unnecessary manual work. Many of you will, of course, know organizations where data is typed from one system into another. It's on screen for 2 applications, and you have to really type it manually from one system to another. That's the most common cause for unnecessary manual work. A lack of electronic interfaces, a lack of interoperability cause a lot of manual work for people who have to do this all by hand, and that's, of course, a lot of waste. Duplicated data, it's quite similar to the first one. Moving data around is not a good thing. Duplicating data is very similar. Many people like to have their own data store because, well, you never know. Let's do it locally, then have local control. It's based on a kind of fear or a need for a feeling in control that people want to have local copies. Duplication of data is a very common kind of waste, and it leads to all kinds of problems. If you have duplicate data, how do you keep stuff in sync? How do you know what the master copy of the data is? How do you know who has access rights, where the data is? It's very difficult to control access to data if it's duplicated in many different places. And we have different kinds of practices to deal with duplicated data. Master data management is an important one. We won't go into the details there. But it's a very common problem, and the fact that there is an entire discipline like master data management surround this issue, that's a sign that there's a lot to be done there. There's a lot of improvement to be made. Another one, underutilized knowledge in data. If you look at lean process improvement, they talk a lot about the knowledge of the people in the process. You really have to use that. There's a lot of knowledge hidden in processes that people have, but that's not used because of, say, a top-down view of the world, like headless people at the bottom of the pyramid that Peter showed. But there's also a lot of underutilized knowledge in data. And big data movement of the last few years is, of course, an example of trying to extract that knowledge from all this data. And the picture I showed here is also an example of that. People often see only a part of the puzzle, a part of the full picture. And this is a very story about this elephant and the blind man feeling the elephant, and one feels of the elephant and thinks it's a tree, and feels the tail of the elephant and thinks it's a snake. Another feels the elephant and thinks, oh, that's a water hose. So if you only see part of the picture, you don't have the full knowledge. And also a very common kind of waste. You really have to be aware of the knowledge you possess in all these mounds of data you have. The notion of unnecessary features, overing, like gold plating your solution, and this picture shows it all. Your Swiss Army knife having every kind of feature, but nobody uses more than just the knife and the scissors. This is very common, and the worst kind of unnecessary features I encounter is often in projects where the project manager has some budget left and decides, well, let's just use this budget and build this nice little feature over there, instead of saying, well, another the organization might be more interested in using this budget for something that adds real business value. So you really have to be clear about the value you add by adding all these features, by gold plating your solution. Overing is usually not the smartest way of spending your money. Unnecessary checks, that's also a very common one in lean process management. All kinds of ways of checking your data, and this is very common. People, of course, the complicated legacy application world at the back end, and then there's a website added to it which does its checks on the data, and there's a layer in between, say a service bus that checks the data, and the back-end system checks it again. Often you see at least layers of checks before the data is at the back-end system. Of course, that's a very wasteful practice. You have to maintain all these checks. They're often not in sync. You see differences. Data is checked in different ways. This causes a lot of extra effort as well. Final one, this is the worst one, complexity. The picture here is a simplified version of a national aerospace control system, and this is maybe not even such a complicated picture if you look at the details. But complexity is maybe the most wasteful kind stuff we produce as architects. And often this is not something that's a result of a short-term development. This is something that arises over the long term. And enterprise architecture should focus on this long term, but somehow we are not always able to avoid this kind of complexity. Big organizations with big systems create lots of complexity in these architectures, and I think our main job as enterprise architects is to curb this complexity. That's really where we add value, by making your organization, by making your application landscape, by making your processes complex. Reducing complexity really helps in avoiding waste, in making organizations leaner, and by doing that, real business value is added. So the 7 wastes of enterprise architecture. Now moving on to the 7 deadly wastes of enterprise architects. This is much more about behavior of the architect. And if you look at these 7, I think you might recognize most of them. I did them all in pictures because this is really easily recognizable. The ivory tower architecture is often practiced in an ivory tower, separate from the rest of the organization. People standing on the tower, maybe looking down upon the rest of the organization, sometimes throwing stuff down from the tower to the organization, and they think it will land somewhere down there, but they don't really feel the need to come down from that tower, explain their ideas, help people really implement them. So an architect that lives in an ivory tower with a sort of academic position is very common in organizations. They usually only last for a few years because executive management will recognize this, and if the ivory tower dweller doesn't deliver actual business value, after years people will say, well, what do we have with this guy, what value does he add, and he's asked to leave often. And this is a way we've seen over the last few years in enterprise architecture, that it has become popular in, say, the early years of this century. Then there's a sort of a backlash around the middle, the zeros, and now picking up again. But I think this backlash had a lot to do with people in the ivory tower coming up with these grand designs. Then that's one. That's the policeman, the architect as a policeman, telling everybody in the organization, no, this isn't conforming to our architecture principles. You should do this differently, or you shouldn't do this at all, which is even worse. We all have that architect as well. So being the policeman is not the way to go. As an architect, you really have to help people conform to guidelines, help them understand why these guidelines are there, and not just simply say, well, this is the rule and I am enforcing it and it's your problem. And the third one, the great creator. This is the guy building these huge, big architectures without really a vision on how to implement them. You can create designs, but there has to be a way of realizing this. And sometimes there are these grand master plans looking 5 years ahead in time, detail out everything you want to have as an architect, but having a transition plan to get there. So too great a creation will never be realized in practice. The abstractionist. Lots of architects that draw these really abstract diagrams with just a few boxes and lines, and then they say, well, this is easy to explain to the stakeholders because it's just a few boxes and lines. These designs are so abstract that don't have any real meaning behind them. You also need, next to the more, palatable pictures for your high-level stakeholders, you need to have the vision to really be aware of how this abstraction is realized in practice. Just abstract pictures, a few boxes and lines, doesn't cut the meat. You really have to get down to the details as well. You have to understand as an architect how these designs are going to be realized. You're not the guy designing the details, of course, but you have to know how to get from this abstract design to more detailed design and finally to implementation. The fifth is slightly different. It's about the tools and techniques that architects use. And I come across a lot of architects that do all their designs in stuff like PowerPoint, maybe some visual diagrams. But there are dangers to this. The first one is that it's often difficult to understand what these PowerPoints mean. They always have to ask the architect himself to view the presentation with it because they are not self-explanatory. The pictures are largely in the head of the architect, and he has to be there to explain the points to you. And the second problem with PowerPoint architecture is that it's very difficult to maintain these architectures. It have all these PowerPoint slides. There's no coherence. You don't know what happens if you change something in part of the architecture to the rest of the architecture. You really need more than just PowerPoint pictures. And of course, my background is in architecture modeling. The Archimate language is, of course, one way of doing this. Having a good architecture language and having good tools to keep your designs coherent is very helpful. This is a webinar about architecture modeling, but I really recommend people to look at architecture models to keep their architectures really practical. And these can lead to the waste number 6. The huge cobwebs where everything is interconnected with everything else, and we've seen this picture of complexity, example of that. Architecture models also help you in keeping stuff clear, but they might be attractive to people in designing these cobwebs and creating this all-encompassing picture of your organization where you have both the breadth of the enterprise and the depth of the model from high-level statements down to the nitty-gritty details, and trying to put that all in one big picture. And we all these huge pictures on walls of architecture rooms to the entire organization. And those pictures have only two useful purposes. To show to your colleagues that you're doing really difficult, complicated, and important work. Look at the complications of our organization. And to show your management that's become all too complicated and stuff needs to be changed. But I think as a working architect, having these large diagrams and pictures on your wall, these cobwebs are not useful. I don't think they help you really do your work. the seventh kind of waste or wasteful behavior, that's perfectionism. I encounter a lot of architects that really are fearful in showing their designs if they're not complete, if they have the feeling that there is still some room for improvement. And I think that's guided. I think you have to be, as an architect, you have to have the courage to show your half-baked designs, discuss them with all kinds of people in the organization, so they help you improve them. And it's also a way of making a much more continuous improvement kind of process than having this grand design at the end, which is complete and perfect and has it all, and then you find out that the world has changed in the meantime and that your design is outdated at the time you are ready to publish it. So here of showing your intermediate products is also very harmful. They tell you in these half products that you share with your colleagues and others in the organization. So basically, this comes down to architects having a more hands-on mentality. They have to be involved in the operational processes as well. They have to know what's going on there. They have to share their ideas. They have to come down from their ivory tower, help others do their work, be more involved in the organization. So move on to EA and Lean and the coherence for the long term. I'm handing over to Peter again.
Thank you, Mark. Let's take a look from the other perspective. If you have all those Lean projects, I'm working in a lot of Lean projects, what would be the places where an architect would have a really good value in those projects? Well, we have seen this D100 cycle, all kind of techniques, and I would like to highlight some of those techniques in every phase one, where it would be really powerful to also involve an architect. And this starts right in the beginning. And one of the techniques here is the SIPOC techniques. SIPOC is supplier input process output customer. And in this case, we combined it with the IGU, which is also input guides output enablers. This is all kind of context of the process, and this is something you will use in the start of every Lean project. You want to do some project scoping, and this is where you use this technique for. And this is also a place where you would want to involve an architect, because an architect can help you to determine this appropriate scope. And it's also at this phase look at the coherence between different initiatives. So maybe there are different projects, and you should take other projects also into account. So this is a very powerful technique to also involve an architect. Now let's do measure phase, and I think in this measure phase where you want to collect all kind of information, you also want to collect information about the process. For example, do some process mapping, and this is typically the thing you would do with the people from the Gemba, from the shop floor, and you will talk about their work and do something brown paper maybe. But if you really, this is quite locally of course. In the of course you want to have the right perspective. So what is this sub-process? How does that fit in the chain-wide process? This could also be something where you could want to involve an architect to also bring in this different perspective. Let's move on to the analyze phase. And there are several techniques we have in this analyze phase, and one of my favorites is this context analysis, also called the Burton hexagon. The kind of hexagon with 6 areas, and if there is an issue, the usual suspect is the process is not good or technology is not good. All right, those are the usual suspect causes. But if you look more closely, and if I look at my experience in doing a lot of Lean projects, I find out that many of the causes of the projects I do are in different areas. For example, stupid rules, one of my favorites here. There are rules that really don't help to get the results from this process. Or maybe people are not motivated. Maybe the organizational structure is not helping to do the right thing. So it's always powerful to also investigate this context of the process. It's also something that's very interesting, I think, to involve an architect with a different perspective to also look at those different context areas. Move on one more step to the improve phase. Well, what we have here from the analyze phases, we have a few root causes that cause our problems. So the root cause here is a complex process. Now, how are we going to solve this? Well, of course, we can share best practices. We have some things we can do ourselves, and we can do it right now. This is what we want, of course, in lean management. We have a lot of those improvements in this left bottom quadrant. But there are also some solutions that we need some more time, and we need some other people. If we want to develop new IT support, well, we need to. That will take more time. This has more impact. Well, in determining what impact those solutions have and who are we going to have to involve and when we can do those things, this is typically also something we want to discuss with this architect. And if you have the architect available at this workshop, it can directly say, you have to take this into account, and this will take some more time. So it's better to focus on this first. So this is something really powerful to also involve the architect. Now we move phase to control phase, and this is the phase where we did the implementation, and we want to make sure that our improvements won't back. So we have this, we want to do checks. For example, we want to address some KPIs. Also something that's very important to also do with a child perspective, to not only locally KPIs, but to do process control with the big picture in mind. Also something you want to have this architect involved. So we talked about the DMIC cycle from define, measure, analyze, improve, control, and in all those phases it is powerful to have an architect involved. And we do this in practice. I also try to involve in those projects an architect in the project team, and he will come to the several workshops to support to do the right things.
So we can conclude that enterprise architecture and lean have a lot in common, certainly in terms of their goals. They want to provide business value, and they are on this trajectory towards business value. And where lean focuses on the small steps, focuses on the long-term goals. You can combine these two practices in this way. Lean is really about making the next step in the direction of the goals that EA is putting for the long term. And vice versa, of course, we can use lean practices in our daily enterprise architecture work as well. Lean way of thinking also applies to enterprise architecture. Enterprise architecture is also a process and is really applicable to the ways of working with EA. So we conclude that lean and EA should help each other. And Peter and I work together in many different ways. This is really something we can recommend to organizations in general. If they have lean practice and they have an enterprise architecture practice, it's fruitful to bring these people into contact with each other, help them reinforce each other's work, make sure that this long-term vision is realized by short-term steps, and make the company as a whole the need for making these different areas work together. Currently, we see that in many organizations there is still quite a large divide between the local improvement people working on the floor on improving processes and the enterprise architecture people sitting somewhere far away in the IT department, often high in the organization next to the CIO. But we really recommend people to bring these two disciplines together, to have experts and enterprise architects talk to each other, and in that way provide business value to the organization. And like I've shown you, there are many different ways in which they can really help each other. So these two wheels, if we make them turn in the right way, make them interlock in a fruitful manner, you can really have these short-term improvements and these long-term visionary movements work all for the organization to provide business value together. That's the core message. We really think that EA and Lean reinforce each other. EA provides the context for these Lean initiatives, helps you focus on the long term, make sure that these local improvements are coherent with the bigger picture. On the other hand, EA must be aware of the need for local decision making. You shouldn't have this big master plan that says it all and defines the details for these local situations as well, because you don't know it. You cannot know the opportunities for local improvement from this top-down perspective. So you really should use EA as a kind of zoning plan, as a way of making the essential decisions for your organization, and try to do everything from the top down. You really have to have this bottom-up input from your Lean and other continuous improvement initiatives. A way of doing this from an architecture perspective is using architecture principles. We could do another webinar about principles themselves, but this is a very useful way of providing high-level guidance to Lean initiatives. So you should avoid having detailed rules for every situation, but you should provide general direction. That's what enterprise architecture is about. So EA and Lean is really about thinking big and acting small, having the long-term vision, taking small steps towards it every day. Collaboration between these two fields to really work. You have to understand the cultural differences. It's a different world. It's about long-term versus short-term. It's about local improvements versus global vision. It's about people who do the actual work versus the people who design this long-term picture. So the cultural differences are important to know and understand. It is really helpful if you could speak a common language between these two groups. So get people together, having them understand each other, having them know their languages, speaking the common language of business value, that's very important. And one way to help this along is using shared models and tools and techniques. Like we have illustrated, it's very useful to combine techniques from both worlds, to use enterprise architecture as a way of steering and guiding Lean projects, and to use ways of working in enterprise architecture. Shared models, in a general sense, can be useful, for example, to have a big picture available to the people doing the local improvements. So having all these kinds of shared instruments really helps you in moving along. And one way of doing that is having tools that support this. Of BizDesign as a provider of these tools is very interested in sharing these techniques, and our tool platform also provides the opportunity of combining process improvement techniques and models with enterprise architecture models. So that's certainly one way to go. Having a shared platform where you can all, as experts from different fields, find models, combine these, make sure that it's all coherent. So that's really an important message to take away from this. So providing the integrated picture. It's about making people work together, about making them work for the good of the organization, providing business value, providing this integrated way of thinking and working, where people from different expertises, different backgrounds contribute their own part to the overall picture. That concludes our talk overall. We've left room for questions. We have provided some links in the presentation. Peter and I have also posted some blogs over the last few months about this combination of Lean and enterprise architecture, where you can find a lot of this discussion in a bit more detail. So I think the floor is now to the participants to provide, to ask us your questions. We will, of course, provide our slides later on in PDF format, and the webinar is going to be recorded. You go to our site, bizdesign.com. You can go to the Open Group site where you can find all the material.
Well, Peter and Mark, that's been excellent. You've really encouraged some very active debate on the chat text facility there, chaps. Just to reiterate, we had a lot of requests to get copies of the slides. I know that Business Design is usually very good at making their presentations available via their download section on Business Design website, so please do keep an eye out there. And as already said, everyone that has attended today and who's registered, an email with a link to the full recording of this event tomorrow. So let's move on to some of the questions we've got on QA, guys. First question from Davey, asking, is a lean technique applicable in every EA circle of the ADM, or do you it as only applicable in the implementation migration phase?
I would say it is applicable in every circle, maybe, well, near every circle, because the practice of lean, focusing on the business value, on doing those activities that really add value, I think that applies to all the phases of the ADM. It applies to the preliminary phase where you decide on the ways of working themselves. Of course, you want to have a lean architecture process, so it starts from there. It will apply to your vision, probably. It certainly applies to the phases in which you design the architecture itself. Like I discussed, the ways in architecture, you have to look at your architecture from a lean perspective itself. So make sure that you do the important stuff and focus on that. It's also applicable to the opportunities and solutions where you decide on priorities. Well, it's about value, it's about avoiding waste, it's about doing the important stuff. So I think indeed it would apply to all of your phases in the ADM.
Well, a comment and a question from Catherine. I think Catherine's been making a comment about the role of sponsors, but a question is, can you suggest some ideas to help sell this to sponsors? I think a very common question.
To sell the combination of EA and Lean to sponsors.
I think it depends a bit on the kind of sponsors you're talking about. If you have, say, the executive level sponsors that mostly discuss architecture and strategy and that sort of stuff, I think you'd approach it from the idea that Lean makes your architecture practice more focused. More focused on this business value issue and make sure that architecture really delivers value. On the other hand, if you're talking about sponsors at this project or process level, I think the main argument there is that you make sure that what you do in terms of local improvements doesn't harm the larger context of the organization, contributes to the rest of the organization, and that will be important to these sponsors as well. They might have a local interest, of course, but they're part of this larger organization and they are well aware of the need to coordinate with the rest of this organization. So I think it depended on the sponsors.
Okay, thank you. A question here from Kevin. I exhibited the perfectionist architect trait myself. How to address the argument that a deliverable should not be released because there are known errors? At what point should errors stop a publication?
I think there are real factual errors that are really big and make a document, say, invalid. Of course, that should stop a publication. But what you might also do, if there's a lot of value in the document and there are still a few errors, you could mark the errors and say, well, this part is not correct yet, but it's usable, so please go ahead and use the rest of the document. If you wait until the full document is complete and correct, it might take a long time. So, at the meantime, you might have, say, 80% of your document ready, finished, and qualified for publication, and you're only waiting for these remaining 20%. That's not very useful. So I would recommend sharing documents, but clear about the status of the parts of the document. So if there are errors, of course, you have to mark them out. But please try to share as much as possible of this that is good, that is valuable, because holding this value, that's also a sort of a wasteful behavior.
Thank you. Question from Davey. Is process modelling something that is hard shared between EA and Lean?
The process models are indeed a kind of, and maybe in a broader perspective, process thinking is something that Lean and EA can really meet each other. So also in Lean management, you also always want to have the end-to-end perspective in mind. You want to have the customer-to-customer perspective in mind, because you want to deliver value overall. And this is also something, a perspective that an architect, of course, will have. So this is something they meet and they can find each other. I agree.
Okay, thank you. Question from Nev. For understanding, what is the difference between an enterprise architect and a solution architect?
That's a common one. There's no completely clear-cut difference, but I would say in general the solution architect is focused in organizations where I find people that call themselves solution architects, mostly focused on application level solutions. They are designing one solution, one application, or say IT solution for a specific problem, whereas an enterprise architect usually discusses the larger scope and is more focused on say horizontal connections between applications or between business processes or other say horizontal links, and vertical links between your processes, your applications, your infrastructure. So I say a solution architect is often focused on one application level solution, and an enterprise architect is about the connections between the layers and columns of your architecture.
Thank you. Question from Yoda. Does Lean follow the same ADM cycle for enterprise architecture development?
I'm not sure that I understand the question, because Lean as a way of working doesn't have the ADM cycle. Lean is of course about process improvement in its own practices. But my question was intended as like the first question: does Lean apply to all phases of the ADM? And then I think the answer would be yes.
Okay, question here. Are any official methodologies, standards or guidelines available for merging Lean and EA effects together?
Any official methodologies? No. So I don't think so. No. Okay,
well, there will be some in the future then. Question from Edgar. What are the main differences and advantages between Lean and other methodologies and techniques?
Well, look at Lean. The biggest, the alternative is Six Sigma, I think, the most well-known. And then you also have theory of constraint, but that's a little smaller as a movement at this time. So there's a talk about Lean management and Six Sigma. And if I look at those both, what you see, Six Sigma is really focused on one problem and take quite some time and be really using all kind of statistics and all kind of advanced techniques to solve that single problem. It's quite some time, and it takes also quite a lot of training to become a Six Sigma practitioner. What you see that many organizations, some of them all tried Six Sigma, but they moved to Lean management because it gives them a little quicker results. It's more about applying best practices, but for many organizations, that's just what's helping them a lot at this time. And maybe in a few years, or maybe for specific problems, they will use Six Sigma. But for me, problems we face in organizations, Lean is a much easier way to methods to apply.
Okay, I see that we're coming to our official close time, so I think this would be a good time to draw today's event to an end. Do you have any final comments you'd like to make, Mark or Peter?
And we would like to thank all the people who have attended the webinar. When we saw the numbers who have registered, I think it was around 1,100 or something. That's quite a lot. So thank you all for joining us. And if you have any further questions, please be in touch. We'll share the slide with all the participants. On the screen right now is our contact information, and of course you'll find us on our website.
Okay, I concur that, and also I'd like to thank you, Mark and Peter, for your time. Excellent presentation. So thank you, everyone, and I'll draw today's event to a conclusion now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dus moeten we wachten.